Longlegs, the new horror thriller film starring Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage, is possibly one of the most interesting films I've seen in recent years to have just cropped up out of nowhere in the film community. If you had asked me, say about 3 or 4 months ago, whether I was excited for a film called Longlegs, I probably would have said no. I'd seen a couple of trailers and a couple of posters, but I honestly didn't really know anything about it, and it was not really on my radar. However, in the last week or so, since the film was released in the UK and America, the film has rapidly gained a lot of popularity solely through word of mouth. And for a film to go from relative obscurity to being the most talked about film of the year in such a very short space of time, purely just through word of mouth, is unlike anything I've seen, especially in recent years. I think the closest thing I've seen to this is Everything Everywhere All at Once, where everyone who was seeing the film was hyping it up, which then caused more people to go and see it, and therefore led to it being such the success it was. Longlegs has managed to do this in like not even a week, and that, to me, that's really impressive. So I decided to bite the bullet and go and see Longlegs to see if it lived up to the hype at a 8:30 showing in the evening, and immediately I was blown away by how busy the screen was. Honestly, there was not a single empty seat in the entire screen, and that blew me away because that is possibly the busiest I've ever seen a screening since possibly before COVID, at least from my perspective anyway. Now that I've actually seen Longlegs, I can completely understand where all the hype is coming from. However, I do feel it is being slightly overhyped in one specific aspect. I've seen a lot of people and a lot of posters and reviews saying that this is the scariest film of the year. Yes, the film is creepy, but I didn't find it that scary. There are a couple of moments that are legitimately quite terrifying, but outside of that, I would say this film is unsettling more than anything else. The best way I can sum up the tone and style of this film is as if someone took Silence of the Lambs and Seven, smashed them together and added a demonic Satanist angle to the proceedings. That is the best way I can try and sum it up, but even then, it kind of does the film a disservice because Oz Perkins has added so much of his own flair and style to this film that it kind of feels very unique, yet also feels like very similar things we've seen in other crime thrillers like Seven and Silence of the Lambs, and even Zodiac to an extent. Personally, I think the film does a very good job of staying right in the middle and not leaning too far to either of those directions. It could go really heavy into the police procedural aspect like you get with Zodiac, or it could lean really heavily into the horror aspects, and it manages to ride that very thin line very effectively, almost doing its own thing for the majority of the runtime. And if it does need to veer into horror, or it does need to veer more into police procedurals, then it will do, but then will revert back to the original course that it was on and stick to its guns. From the moment the film starts, you can immediately tell that something about the movie is kind of off, and it just keeps amping that up the longer the film goes on, and never lets you come up for air until the credits are rolling. And this is all down to a number of different elements all working very seamlessly together. The main one being Oz Perkins's direction. This is one of the most masterfully directed horror films I've seen in a long time. Every single shot, every single frame, every single camera move feels purposeful and motivated and very deliberate as well. There are hardly any close-ups in this film at all. The majority of the movie is shot in wides. I think the closest shot you get to anybody is a mid-shot, but it's still on a wide-angle lens. So you see more of the background than you do of them, and it always gives you this very unsettling feeling of you're never quite close enough to fully grasp the situation or the characters that you're seeing. You're always put at like a couple of foot distance from the things you're seeing, and you can never quite fully grasp everything that's going on in front of you because you're that far away. You can just about understand what's happening, but because you're at a distance, it means you can't get further in, which in some films that can be a detriment, but here, because it's so purposeful, it adds that extra sense of uncertainty to the proceedings of the film. Plus, this choice to use wide angles for like 99% of the film also adds a discerning feel to certain scenes in the movie. For example, there is a scene where Lee Harker, the main character, is roaming through her house because she thinks someone else is in there. And there are just these certain shots which are just framed a little bit off kilter, where you're seeing her on, say, the left-hand side of the screen, and to the right is a door frame that leads to her kitchen or another part of the house. And it always feels like you're anticipating something, or something is going to happen but never eventually does, because it's framed that way. Because the door frame is in the shot, you think something's going to happen with said door frame, but nothing ever does, and it's that sense of anticipation and uncertainty, again mixed with the use of wide angles, that I thought was genuinely masterful. I also have to mention two other aspects to this film that I thought really worked in sealing the deal in terms of what this film was trying to go for, and that is the score and the performances. The score is brilliant, it's very minimalist and doesn't crop in all of the time, but then there are some scenes that start off silent and then the score just gradually creeps in as if, again, something's going to happen, or it's anticipating something that might happen later but never actually does. And I think the score does a very good job of complementing the cinematography in that manner. And then there's the performances, which are great across the board, but the two big main performances that everyone's going to be talking about are Micah Monroe as FBI agent Lee Harker and Nicolas Cage as the titular Longlegs. First off, you have Micah Monroe as FBI agent Lee Harker, and honestly it took me a while to try and figure out what exactly she was trying to do with her performance. Because I've seen her in other films like The Guest and It Follows, I know what a normal performance from her is. I know how she normally acts, so seeing her act this way in this film felt really off. And again, it's another thing that just feels a bit off kilter and not quite right. Just her mannerisms, the way she speaks, just feels ever so slightly off and doesn't sound like how a normal person would speak normally. So yeah, her performance is really good. It's just you have to kind of know going into it what she's going for with that performance, which will then make you appreciate that performance just a bit more and not have it seem rather odd. And I think the film does a good job of explaining that as well. As the film unfolds later on and you start to understand more about her backstory and her character, things start to make more sense in terms of why she acts the way she does. And then you have Nicolas Cage as the serial killer Longlegs, and I personally find Nicolas Cage a bit hit and miss sometimes. Occasionally he can be perfectly cast and be fantastic in a role, but then other times he can be miscast and it doesn't quite work, and his performance can seem very strange. Here, I think he is phenomenal. This might be my favourite performance from him in recent years, and I'm not going to say too much about his performance because it's the one aspect in all of the film's marketing that they're deliberately keeping a secret and saving for the final film. You see just the right amount of his character for it to have the impact it needs. I was slightly worried about halfway through the film that we were going to see too much of his character, but then certain things happen throughout the film and I think we see just the right amount where it's effective, but you kind of want to see more at the same time. There are certain choices that Nicolas Cage makes when playing Longlegs that I genuinely found so disturbing and just got continually under my skin. The main one being his voice. I don't really know how to explain what he does with his affectation throughout the film without going into spoilers or just showing you a straight up clip of him speaking, but it's not human. That's the best way I can sum it up. But I think what also helps add to all this as well is the way Nicolas Cage looks throughout the movie, which again is really unsettling. I can understand why some people might watch this film and find not just the way he looks, but his performance rather goofy or humorous. But from my perspective, I found it incredibly disturbing. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Longlegs. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the film if you've seen it. I do think, like I said earlier, it is being slightly overhyped in terms of it being called the scariest film of the year. It's not scary, it's just incredibly creepy. And I wanted to set the record straight. It's not scary, it's just incredibly unsettling. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.